Of course, like Aphrodite earlier, Ares simply flies to Olympus with his wounds, mortal wounds for any mortal, then whines and begs Zeus for pain-killing drugs and healing, which he promptly receives. Following his healing treatment, we find Ares once again in good spirits. Quote, and he washed him down, dressed him in robes to warm his heart, and flanking the son of Cronus, down he sat, Ares, exultant in the glory of it all. End quote. Soon enough, Ares will return to what he knows best, war and slaughter. For Athena and Hera, their motivations reside elsewhere. Hera is the champion of marriage, and Athena is the strategic war goddess known for her cunning, her wisdom, and law and justice. The Trojan War is more than two sides siding with and fighting for their royal rulers. It's really an epic battle between chaos and order, writ large, occupied by gods as polar coordinates on a kind of grid graph, if you will. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, love, and pleasure, sides with the Trojan prince, Paris, whom abducted Helen for her beauty. Contrast this with Hera, the goddess of marriage and family, who sides with the Achaean Menelaus, the man who originally married to Helen. Likewise, we see Ares side with the Trojans, the side that started the conflict by way of Helen's abduction. With the normal order out of balance and tempers high, Ares can thrive. His goal is carnage and blood. Even when he's stabbed in the bowels and must flee to Olympus in childish agony, he's, quote, exultant in the glory of it all. Contrast this with Athena, who sides with the Achaeans. Athena brings with her the spirit of law, of order, to the pandemonium. How can she stand aside while the maniac Ares gets high as a kite on bloodlust? She must restore the balance and assist the army on the side of returning Helen to Menelaus and order to the land. Above it all sits Zeus, the god of gods, with his divine scales. Zeus is the grand arbiter in the fates of men and armies. The other gods and goddesses intervene sometimes with his blessing, other times in disguise or in secret, but Zeus holds the keys in the long game. It's unclear exactly what kind of output he desires in the Trojan War, and he is subject to reasonable persuasion, but there is an overarching sense that he has a master plan for the future of the people. It's a position of divine fate that he holds. When Hector and Achilles finally meet in battle, we see a concrete example of his power, but also part of his ambiguity. Quote, then Father Zeus held out his sacred golden scales. In them he placed two fates of death that lays men low, one for Achilles, one for Hector, breaker of horses. And gripping the beam mid-haft, the Father raised it high, and down went Hector's day of doom, dragging him down to the strong house of death, and God Apollo left them. End quote. So yes, Zeus decides, but it is through the sacred golden scales. What are the sacred golden scales? Surely a metaphysical tone is imbued here, something even beyond the whims of the gods, perhaps. Weaved into the story, and to me more than anything, is the notion of honor among men. As in the Odyssey, the Iliad is preoccupied with living, fighting, and dying with honor, protecting and elevating the name of the house in the face of fate, influenced by the gods and the goddesses. How will Hector confront his fate? We already have a glimpse earlier in the story when he clashes with his comrade Polydamas. As word spreads amongst the Trojans that Achilles is plotting against them, Polydamas suggests that the armies remain inside the city walls of Troy, to which Hector counters, quote, I, for one, I'll never run from grim assault. I'll stand up to the man, Achilles. See if he bears off glory or I bear it off myself. The god of war is impartial. He hands out death to the man who hands out death. End quote. When Achilles and Hector finally meet in battle, Hector's fate is already sealed by way of Zeus and his golden scales. The rage of Achilles, however, shows little mercy. As Hector gasps for dying breath, after Achilles thrusts a spear through his neck, a simple request is made. Hector asks that his body be given back to his people for a proper burial. Instead, after Hector dies, Achilles and his men desecrate Hector's body. Following this, Achilles ties Hector's body to the back of a chariot and drags his mangled corpse across the battlefield in view of Trojan royalty. Achilles, what are you doing? What are you doing? Of course, his excessive celebration, or hubris, if you will, later leads to his own death by courtesy of a poisoned arrow to the heel, shot by the one and only Prince Paris of Troy. As a side note, Achilles is half god, and the only way he can die is through his heel, the singular part of his body not dipped in the magical water of immortality by his mother Thetis. Hence the phrase, referring to a person's weakness as their quote unquote Achilles heel. After some intervention by the gods and goddesses and following a meeting between Achilles and Priam, the king of Troy, Hector's body is returned to Troy to the consolation of the Trojans, particularly his mother Hecuba. The story ends not with the gods and goddesses, and not with the rage of Achilles or the rescue of Helen, nor with any other Achaean heroes like Odysseus, Menelaus, or Agamemnon. Instead, we end with the Trojan Hector, breaker of horses. Quote, "At last, when young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, the people massed around illustrious Hector's pyre. And once they gathered, crowding the meeting grounds, they first put out the fires with glistening wine, wherever the flames still burned in all their fury. And once they'd heaped the mound, they'd turned back home to Troy. And gathering once again, they shared a splendid funeral feast in Hector's honor, held in the house of Priam, king by will of Zeus. And so the Trojans buried Hector, breaker of horses." End quote. This is the end of the Iliad. It concludes with a famous, honorable warrior receiving a proper burial. In the end, the Iliad isn't only about the gods and goddesses, although they certainly play a central role. Beyond our main characters on the side of the Achaeans and the Trojans, it's also about Ipesen, son of Phausias, killed by early Pylus, or about Helenus, son of Unops, killed by Hector. It's about Pisander, son of Antimachus, killed by Agamemnon. It's about Hector, son of Priam, supreme commander of the Trojans, killed by Achilles. It's a war between men, and there's a price to pay for the soldiers and their families. From Achilles' grief at the death of Patroclus, his brother in arms, to the agony of Hecuba at the death of her son Hector, the suffering, brutality, and deep sorrow of war in the Iliad isn't concealed or glossed over. The pain is felt as much as the story's heroism and violence is real. The excessive violence and scheming by the gods may be entertainment enough for some, but the real glory of the Iliad is the men high and low, the leaders, the scouts, the shield bearers, and the foot soldiers, whom willfully charge into battle, mortality in the balance, in the great eternal war between justice and slaughter, marriage and passion, rage and temperance, and cowardice and honor. Summary. Balanced and brutal, personal and universal, the epic Iliad captures the spirit of war and loss with powerful elucidation. Rating, 8.5. This review was done on May 30th, 2018. Thanks for listening, and I apologize for slaughtering any of the names.